Back when our parents were young, they had an entertainment center, just like we do. The only difference is that it was the family itself that generated the entertainment, and the box was a piano. We're stepping back in time today for a little four-hand piano music on a note to you. I'm Virginia Eskin. After a delicious dinner, it sometimes is fun to just get up and do something. Play touch football, or how about a little four-hand piano music? Hey, Richard, come and play. Well, my collaborator is Richard Knisely, and he hosts a daily classical show here in Boston. It's called Classical Performances, and it's on every day from 12 to 4. And he specializes in having live musicians. It's great to have you here, Richard.
That's right. Good to be here.
Good. And you're game to sit down and do what people routinely did, I think, up until, what, the 30s maybe?
At the outside.
You think that it was
By the
already...
time radio came along, then people got more passive about home entertainment anyway.
Yeah, because I remember hearing about all my uncles in Canada. They could all play the piano and they could sing, and the idea that you made your own entertainment was just a sort of a commonplace. So I always think it's television that's driven the nail into the coffin of live music, but maybe you're right. Maybe it's radio. Well, let's talk about some of the issues of four-hand music. What happens? There are certainly rules of the road, and it's
many of them unwritten.
Well, when you sit down, I think for people who are listening to us and need to know, there's this thing. It's called primo, which means first, and segundo means second, and primo is the right hand
on the top.
Yeah, and segundo is in the bass. And where was it decided that secundo got to hold the pedal, or got the control of the pedal? Do we know?
Now you're talking history here. It just makes sense because the bottom is the harmonic basis, and that's where the pedaling.
But you just had the melody. You had that beautiful melody. Play some of it there. Yeah, but as you very cutely said to me just before, you said, "Give me some pedal," because of course the pedal is like your air valve, or the gas in your car. And I've always felt that it's odd that the bass has the control of the pedal, because the melody really needs it more than the bass. But you're right; it's probably the overtone and the loudness.
Well, like everything in four-hand piano, it all comes out of working together.
Let's just demo that, because now I'll play too loudly, just what you were playing, and I'll do what a bad four-hand bass player would do. Okay?
All right.
And okay, now this is...
Sounds like the Cossacks coming.
This is good. Very nice. Are you pleased? Perfect. So, I think...
Some improvisation there.
Yes.
Helps.
I think that what I enjoy, if I'm in a living room and if I see four-hand music, because it usually is long and thin on the piano, I know that somebody in the household probably knows how to do it. So it's sort of fun to enlist maybe the husband of the hostess. And do you ever do that when you go to dinner parties? Snoop in the piano bench? And
so few people play the piano, first of all, and play forehand, that the opportunity doesn't arise as often as one would like.
Well, let's start a movement.
All right.
Well, I tend to look around, of course, when I'm in a home. If I see a beautiful piano, then I presume, maybe wrongly, that people play. Richard has graciously agreed to play some other pieces that we'll hear later on in the program, some Poulenc, Rachmaninoff, and the famous Brahms Hungarian dance. I'd also like to point out, though, that there's, just like a lawyer going into a trial, we did agree on a few things. And you make pencil marks just as though you were my violinist, say, or if you were a great singer and I was going to be playing for you. You made me know where you would like some emphasis, and sometimes it's allowed. If you wanted more pedal, you might give me a little nudge.
A little knee.
And then in olden days,
action.
I think some men, maybe if they had spotted a pretty young thing earlier in the evening, they would sort of, why don't you come over here and play with me? And then that gave them an excuse to maybe get a little nudge on the elbow action.
Muzzle up on the piano bench.
Yeah, and there is some forehand music where you have to sort of go in. And in the Poulenc that you like to play, you have to go way over in front of my chest to go down, and I've got to sort of...
I play the bottom of the piano.
Right.
And,
so there's a little physicality involved. You have to sort of sniff with the other person because you have to phrase together. That's an important component.
The real issue for me in four-hand piano is it's hard enough playing solo to get your hands to agree with each other. The left hand and the right hand are, I don't know if it's left brain and right brain, but they always seem to be wanting to do different things, and you have to get them to agree. When you're playing four-hand piano, your left hand, if you're on the top, is actually a different person.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's the other rule, and I learned that from Rudolf Serkin up at Marlborough, because he loved to play forehand, and he also used it as a teaching tool for teaching people about balance, because you have four hands, but your right hand on top and my left hand on bottom are the bookends. And then ironically, my right hand, which is my strongest, and it's also in the middle of the loud part of the piano. But that's terrible because then I'm going to obliterate your pretty melody.
Right.
And your left hand is like the violas, or, it's kind of along for the ride. And so our two hands then start like turtles climbing on each other. You always can tell who's a bully when you play, because they push your paw down into the key.
Well, and if the composer knows what he's doing, he takes care of these issues. In the Dvořák, for instance, my whole left-hand part is...
Right. Nicely delicate. Right. Part
That's
of
all there is to it.
Yeah. Well, you played it very, very prettily. Well, we're going to hear the most famous duo of four-hand music, and that would have to be Paul badura-skoda and Jörg Demus. They're very good friends, and right after the war, they said that they'd be invited to dinner parties, and the inevitable question would come up, would you play something? And they didn't like being put into a competitive position, so they decided they would play together. And I guess it was so successful, people said, oh, you should take this on the road. And they did, and that coincided with the great recording putsch that would have happened in the 40s. Anyway, they're the best, and we've chosen a Rondo by Schubert. It's the little one in D major. It's written about 1818 for a Hungarian friend of Schubert's, a man named Gahi, and probably he was a pianist whom Schubert enjoyed kicking melodies around with. Let's listen to the little Deutsche 608 Rondo in D major played by badura-skoda and Jörg Demus. So there was a beautiful Rondo by Schubert, and it had a very light sort of dance-like quality, naturally. It was and it would require the pianist to play very lightly and certainly not over pedal. And now I want you to hear just the opposite. Jörg Demus and badura-skoda are going to drag the melody, and you'll hear, of course, the key is profoundly different too. Schubert writes in the key of F minor. And listen to the way the top, primo, plays the melody. There's an intro, it sets it up, and then the melody comes in. It's just magnificent the way they do that. It reminds me of an accompanist trawling along behind a wonderful singer. And that's, of course, the very best of four-hand piano music when you think of yourself as a unit that way. Listen to just the very beginning of the Fantasia in F minor. That was just a little taste of the great F minor Schubert Fantasy, which is a benchmark piece when it comes to four-hand piano music. It's probably the most oft played, and I would venture to say it's also the most difficult. We're talking about four-hand piano music today on A Note to You, and we're trying to get a handle on some of the difficulties and some of the fun. And we're going to turn now to a very difficult piece that Franz Liszt wrote. It's called The Battle of the Huns. So you can imagine what's going to happen with all four hands on the piano. Visigoths, Huns, all sorts of people are going to come crashing down. And Liszt loved to make effects at the piano. And he also loved at the end of a lesson to demonstrate sound effects, and nothing like the whole medium of four-hand piano music to really give him vent to his imagination. And he wrote several tone poems for four-hand form. Listen to how Liszt tries to really replicate an orchestra in the four-hand piano form. This is an amazing tone poem. It'll go on for about 12 minutes. And since he couldn't always afford an orchestra, he would dream up something very large scale. And of course, it has a lot of pyrotechnical effects, octaves. And it's sort of interesting that the two women you're going to hear play this piece studied with the two men who just played the Schubert, badura-skoda and Jörg Demus. So we sort of chose them especially because they're like from the horse's mouth, But these two women, Georgia and Louise Mangos, manage it all very nicely, I think. They don't get in each other's way, and there's no over-blurring of pedaling. And I bet they got some good advice from those two Viennese pianists. Here it is, The Huns Battle by Liszt. just heard all the Huns wrestle to the ground in the hands of Franz Liszt. That was Georgia and Louise Mangos playing the Huns battle. And we're examining forehand music today on A Note to You. And in just a moment, we're going to regain the good services of Richard Knisely, who's a classical radio announcer here on WGBH. I'm Virginia Eskin, and we're cozying up with the sound of what piano forehand music sounds like. Drop me a line if you have a chance. Tell me what forehand piano music you like. I'd love to have your comments about our program. The address is A Note to You, care of WGBH Radio, 125 Western Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. The email address is anotetoyou@wgbh.org. A Note to You is made possible by the friends and alumni of Northeastern University. Now we're going to do a little something different. I've given up the pedal, and Richard's got control of the lower part of the piano. He's secundo, and now I'm going to be primo. And we're going to play the famous Hungarian dance. And I bet a lot of home pianists have played this, Richard.
Oh, certainly. This is a piece that is recognized around the world.
You know, it's interesting. In this version, it's in F-sharp minor. And I was thinking that's because it's a little easier for us to perch up on the black keys.
Yes.
But when it's played by orchestras, it's in G minor, which would lay under the fiddles better because they have the melody. So Brahms knew what he was doing. All right, let's play.
I always feel more comfortable doing the basso part for some reason.
Oh, it's because you're a basso person. All right, up on your black keys. Here we go. That would
so bad.
Get your digestion going after a dinner party.
Yeah, really. Acid indigestion.
No. Well, we're going to now move to a Frenchman, Emmanuel Chabrier. And he was sort of like Schumann. He obeyed his father up to a point and trained to become a civil servant. But deep down, he always wanted to be a musician. So he turned to music late in life. And I think it kind of left a slight stain on his psyche because he didn't leave the civil service until he was 40 years old. And that's really late to begin a life in music. And it always hung over his head, and he never felt that he had achieved great prominence. But he's left behind a body of interesting music, and he loved four-hand piano form. When you're building a four-hand program, you inevitably have to turn to Chabrier because he poked in all kinds of little jokes, the way Debussy would poke fun at Wagner. Chabrier did the same thing. You can hear little echoances of Wagner. And this is called Cortège burlesque. So it's a make fun of a funeral procession. Listen to it here, played by Georges Rabol and Sylvie Ducat. I think they're perfect for this piece by Chabrier. that was sort of a pretty piece, don't you think, Richard?
I
I'm
love
talking with Richard Knisely, radio host here in Boston, and he's gamely agreed to come on the show. And you go down to Newport. You're the voice from the Newport Festival.
Every year, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. You should play four hands down there.
Okay, let's make a date.
We'll take over the breakers.
All right.
You want to play a movement from probably one of the most famous four-hand pieces. Mm-hmm. This sonata that Poulenc wrote. And you had an interesting observation when we were playing it through just a minute ago. You were talking about how it sounded like American in Paris.
Well, there are moments in it. I think Poulenc was, of course, very suave, urbane, Parisian, and I think he often liked to reflect suave, urbane, Parisian things in his music. This is a very fine example, and it has very interesting premonitions of Gershwin. Of course, Gershwin was very influenced by the French composers, and there are moments in this music that really look forward to.
Yeah, play that part, because that sounded like American in Paris to us.
Traffic congestion. Exactly.
And this stuff that I play, it also could be like the American in Paris traffic horn part.
Yes. You can hear some of the old-fashioned klaxon horns, the squeeze
on
horns on the
old-fashioned cars. And that would have been a new concept, the idea of urban noise.
Well, it was in 1918 that Poulenc wrote this piece. And at that time, Poulenc was very much into being a naughty boy and composing. So there's a lot of that noisy naughtiness in this piece.
It started with Strauss, I think, in the Sinfonia Domestica. Remember Crying Babies? You know what I mean? The idea of taking weird concepts from modern life and making them somehow into art. Of course, it was happening in the fine arts a great deal.
George Antile in this country was doing the same thing.
Right. Well, let's play the first movement. This is called a prelude. And now I'm back on the bottom. I'm secundo, and you're going to be primo. And let's just illustrate the beginning is really hard. You have to put your left paw way down there.
This is part of the entertainment Poulenc wrote into this piece.
Yeah,
is
play
visual.
that chord. Play
the top
that.
person has to play at the very bottom of the keyboard and at the very top at the same time.
Go. Right. Now I'm way in the middle of you. I'm in the middle of the piano. Envision that, listeners.
A pretzel at the keyboard here.
And he's trying to push me off my bench. No, not really. Okay. Let's have a thwack at this.
All right.
Okay? Well, you didn't mush me.
Well, there are moments in that where you could play just about anything, and
That's what you said before.
well, Poulenc wanted to make biting, nasty noises at certain points. Poulenc was essentially a conservative composer, but there's always these what I call nasty surprises in his music that are, of course, a lot of fun.
Like the little lemon juice on the fillet of sole. Well, now we're going to play a completely contrasting piece. It's a favorite of mine, Richard. I like the key that it's in, E-flat minor. Very evocative key.
Dark.
Yeah, and it's Russian. And of course, it's by one of the station's favorite composers, Rachmaninoff. You know what it sounds like to me? When you go to a merry-go-round, those horses that go up and down.
Steam organ,
Yeah.
calliope sort of thing.
Maybe in our childhood we heard that piece on the soundtrack or something.
Maybe in his childhood.
Yeah. We were just playing Rachmaninoff's Italian polka. And my guest has been Richard Knisely, who's a wonderfully fun person. He's not just a classical music host. He's a game pianist.
Did you say gamey?
No, I said game.
You have to make sure you have your personal hygiene together when you're playing.
Oh, that's true.
Playing four-hand piano.
Yeah, I played once with a woman who was on a garlic mission, and I practically passed out. Oh, you smell good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank
Virginia.
you, Richard, very much. I want to thank Richard Knisely again for being a good sport and coming and playing on the program. It's been fun to have a guest, somebody who would play along with me. And that's sort of the whole spirit of what four-hand piano music is about. It's not intended to be profound, and it's most of us regard it as really a fun thing to do. Our engineer today has been Alan Mattis. Our producer is Alan McClellan, and I'm Virginia Eskin. A Note to You is made possible by the friends and alumni of Northeastern University, and it's produced by Northeastern University in cooperation with WGBH Radio, Boston.